Blossom is the Spring integration module for Spring. And in this presentation, we will be looking at source code. So my name is Tobias Mattsson. I'm the founder of the Blossom open source project. It was started last year. The first version was released in November. And then in May of this year, version 1.0 was released. Since then, I've joined Magnolia. So Blossom is now developed, maintained, and supported by Magnolia. I joined Magnolia in June. A little about myself. I've used Spring Framework for many years. I've been a Java consultant for many years. And I've implemented and been part of many projects with a strong focus on integration, both in the finance sector for electronic invoicing and in the travel sector for integration with web services for plane ticket bookings, rental cars, payment integrations, and so on. I've been using Magnolia since 2007, when we started a project where I was the project lead. And I'm sort of a Spring fanboy. I try to use Spring wherever I can, so it was natural for me to try to bring Spring framework into Magnolia with that project. And the ideas that make up Blossom came from that project. So, why use Spring? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Spring is a Java-based application framework. It has a strong focus on web applications and enterprise applications. It's one of the most popular frameworks in the Java space for very good reasons. It's been around since 2003, and it pioneered a broad feature set when it was released. So Spring is a lightweight container. It's a container in the sense that it manages your objects and the life cycle of your objects. It creates them and it destroys them when they're done. And it's lightweight in the sense that it doesn't require you to implement any specific interfaces or extend any component classes. So it doesn't impose a component model on you. It works on plain objects. And it uses and provides dependency injection within this container. Dependency injection is all about connecting objects together, which is very powerful because it lets you not bother about how to connect them and how to find dependencies. Your object doesn't have to contain boilerplate code to connect them to other objects, which is very useful for testing, of course, where you can inject testing mocks instead of the actual objects. Spring also brought aspect-oriented programming to the masses, which is very powerful also. AOP is about introducing and adding behavior to your objects, where you can do powerful things like transaction management is a popular example, or logging or auditing across your application. Spring also has a good set of enterprise service abstractions, which are abstractions for common APIs that you use, where they embed and use best practices on top of APIs such as JDBC, Hibernate, JPA, JDO, all of the big enterprise services and APIs that you use. There's 2.5 million developers using Spring worldwide, which is 2/3 of all Java developers, which is kind of amazing. More than half of the Fortune 500 use Spring. And more than 70% of enterprises cite improved productivity, faster project completion, improved portability, and application quality as reasons for using Spring. So the framework consists of 20 optional modules that you can pick and choose from. Many of them implement these service abstractions. So if you're not using JDBC, just don't include that module. One of the modules is Spring Web MVC, which is the web framework. This we'll be talking a lot about today. There's also a project called Spring Webflow, which provides support for conversations, for lengthy conversations with your visitors on your website. A good example is multi-step forms, like booking flows, payment flows, when you pay in a web shop, and so on. There's also Spring Security, which is a very popular product for doing authorization and authentication on your website. It has support for things like LDAP, OpenID, HTTP authorization, and it's also very easy to customize for your own user database. And recently there is a project called Spring Web Services, which is both for providing and exposing web services. And it's been estimated that 70% of all Java platforms and middleware provides embedded support for Spring today. 70% is pretty amazing. So how does Blossom integrate Spring into Magnolia? First off, it integrates Spring into the module lifecycle, which is very important because this means that Spring will start up and shut down as part of a module within the module manager of Magnolia. Very important. And then it integrates Spring Web MVC. And it provides additional bridging for areas where Spring and Magnolia overlap, which mostly has to do with localization, low-scale resolution. So let's look closer at Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC stays true to the model view controller pattern, which is the foundation for most web toolkits and UI toolkits out there. It's been around since, I think, the 80s when Smalltalk popularized it. The model view controller pattern is interesting because it separates your business logic from your presentation logic. So in the model view controller pattern, the controller is responsible for performing actions and providing in the model that's going to be presented. So what's important to note here is that business logic is separated from presentation logic. If you look at this example, you'll see a very simple Spring Web MVC controller. I'll just walk through it. What makes it a controller is the controller annotation. It then has a method called handle request, which is annotated by request mapping. The method takes a request parameter called ID, which in this example is a book ID. It then uses a web service to fetch a book by that ID and provides a model and view object that it returns. And as you might notice, there's no logic for looking up this web service. Instead, there's just a field annotated with auto-wired. This is how dependency injection works in Spring. The controller is housed on the URL /book. At the bottom, you'll see an example URI with this controller. It could be acmebookstore.com/book. ID is 1327. Just one note here. I've explicitly said that this is a JSP, which doesn't seem very decoupled from the view. I've done this mainly for illustration reasons. In a real application, you wouldn't say JSP. You would just use a token, and that will be resolved later for the view you want. So you can dynamically choose whether you want to output a JSP or free marker or XML or JSON or whatever. You can even decide the view you want depending on what the client is expecting. Like if the client is asking for JSON, you can give him JSON, otherwise give him HTML. So how does Spring Web MVC fit in Magnolia? This concept should be familiar. Basically, what I want to show here is that the request is handled by a page template that then includes paragraphs. You should know this already, I guess. So what Blossom does is it embeds the MVC pattern inside templates and paragraphs. So what happens here is the template is driven by a controller, and the paragraph is driven by a controller. And this has an interesting effect, because now templates and paragraphs are decoupled from view rendering. So there's no longer a concept of this template is a JSP. It's backed by a controller that can take decisions on what view technology to use. Which is cool, but there's a huge limitation here. And it has to do with the fact that the controller that's running in the paragraph cannot issue redirects. And issuing redirect is very common in web applications. Like if you're unable to issue redirects, you're going to have real limitations to what you can do in your controller. The way Blossom solves this is by pre-executing the controller. And this is for paragraphs. So what it does is that it moves the controller for a specific paragraph up ahead, so it's executed before the template, very early in the Magnolia filter chain. This means that the pre-executed controller can decide to issue a redirect, or just to render something completely different than the page. But it can also not decide to do this. If it doesn't want to output a redirect for some reason, it just returns a model in view like it would normally. And that result is then rendered into the page where this paragraph belongs. So the fact that it was pre-executed is totally transparent. And this means that the controller in the paragraph is unlimited. You can do anything in the controller that you can do in any web application framework. So basically, you have all the power that Spring Web MVC gives you, even inside the paragraph. The way you trigger this is by passing along a request parameter, which is called _packed, which, if I remember correctly, stood for pre-execution controller ID. It's just packed. Blossom has a tag lib for this. Blossom packed input outputs this input. It's a hidden. Or append it to your URIs. So let's talk about the Blossom programming model, how we actually use this. Blossom is based on annotations. It's non-intrusive in the way that it does not require you to implement any interfaces or extend any classes. It takes a very Spring-centric approach. Since I come from Spring, that's how I wanted it implemented. And it's based on a design principle that says that the controller is the template. The controller is the paragraph. And the controllers are automatically available in Magnolia as templates and paragraphs. And then dialogs, they're created programmatically, which we'll get to in a few slides. So this is a very minimal example of what a template looks like. Basically, there's nothing different here from a regular controller in Spring, except the template annotation. And on the annotation, I've said 2 columns, which is the name of the template. Once this is loaded by Spring, which usually happens by class path loading, it's detected on the class path and loaded in. It's automatically available in Magnolia without any extra configuration. So it's available as in the drop-down. You can select it and start using it. Dependency injection, of course, is available inside your controller template. And the controller can implement any logic that it wants at this step, like look up Google Analytics keys or verify that the website visitor is logged in, or call some web service or read from a database. And let's move on to paragraphs. This is very similar. It's also a simple controller where I've added the paragraph annotation. Simple paragraph is the name of the paragraph. Then I've said dialog equals simple dialog, which is the dialog to use for this paragraph. And then there's a special annotation for the paragraph description. Also here you have dependency injection, and you can do any logic that you like. And they look and feel like any regular paragraph would in Magnolia. Note that the dialog is configured like that. Dialog equals simple dialog. And this also makes it easy to implement things like multi-step forms, since you can just output a different view for every step. So if we move on to dialogs, like I said, dialogs are created using code, not configuration. It's an API based on annotations. The dialogs are also detected and automatically available in Magnolia. And Blossom provides validation of dialog input. So this is an example of what a dialog looks like. It's a simple Java class annotated with dialog factory, which holds the name of the dialog. And what you do in classes like this is you add methods and you annotate them with the tab factory. And in the annotation, you specify the label of the tab. So this is a class that provides a dialog named page dialog. It has two tabs, content and meta. In these methods, you get as an argument a tab builder object, which you use to build the tab. So with this object, you can call add edit, add checkbox, and so on, to add things to the tab, add controls to the tabs. The arguments you see to these methods are the name of the control, title, for instance, and then the label, title, and the description that goes under the control. And since these are created using code, you can do some interesting stuff here. For instance, the navigation checkbox. You might not want to include that on any page. So you can have an if statement that checks, well, are we running this dialog on a page directly under the root of the repository? Only then should this checkbox be available. You can also add logic like maybe only certain users should be able to set meta keywords. You can
how do you reach that information from this class? Is something injected into this class? Some kind of context object?
There's a number of available arguments that you can use in your methods. So you would add an object called dialog creation context as a parameter to this method. Then you'll get the context, and from that object you can get the request object, the website node, and so on. And for checking the user, you can just go into the Magnolia classes and look at the logged user. And since these are Java classes, you can use inheritance. So you can create a base class. In this case, there's an abstract base class called base dialog that has the meta tab. And then you can inherit from it, and the meta tab will be inherited, of course. Another example where you might want to use this is in case where you have a huge set of, or a number of banners, and all of them should have like common properties for their dialogs. So you could have an abstract banner class and inherit from it. On the concrete class there in use page dialog, there's an annotation called tab order, which specifies the order in which these tabs should appear, which is necessary since this API uses Java reflection, which doesn't preserve order of methods, so you'll have to specify them. And this is an example of how to do dialog validation, which is a very cool feature. Basically what you do is you create a method, you annotate it with tab validator, and then you specify the name of the tab. In this method, you can do any validation you like. In this example, it checks that the meta description is not shorter than 20 characters. If it is, it outputs a message saying that you need to provide a longer meta description. And when this fails, the dialog cannot be saved, so you cannot add a paragraph where validation fails. You cannot edit a paragraph and save values that doesn't pass validation. Now, in my experience, there's usually a one-to-one mapping between the paragraph and the dialog that's used by that paragraph. Like typically you create a paragraph and then you create the dialog that's used only for that paragraph. So therefore Blossom provides a convenience mechanism. So what you can do is you add methods for constructing tabs directly in your paragraph controller. You'll notice here that I'm no longer saying which dialog it is in the paragraph annotation. And there's no additional configuration here. Just add the annotated method, and this paragraph has a dialog. Which is nice. Also, in my experience, I found that it's the same thing with templates. You create your template, and then for your template, you require one or more dialogs that are used specifically for this template. So, for the sake of readability, you are able to add an annotation called dialog factory on a method inside your template, so you can keep everything in one place. This method is very similar to the tab factory methods, except now you get a dialog builder argument, which you use to add tabs, and on those tabs you add controls, just like before. And it's also possible to add validation to this dialog, which you do with the dialog builder object. You can add validators on it. This is a bit more complicated example. It goes back to the book controller example I used earlier to explain Spring Web MVC. So this is the book paragraph. What I've done is I've added the paragraph annotation, and I've said that the name of this paragraph is book. The bookstore web service here is dependency injected. And at the bottom you can see a method annotated with tab factory. So in the handle request here, what I do is, let's start at the content tab method. What happens there is the dialog is populated dynamically with the books available from this web service. So when the editor adds this paragraph to a page, the dialog opens, and there's a select box of all the books available on the web service. And he can choose the book, and the ID of that book will be stored in the repository. And then later, when the paragraph is rendered, in the handle request method, that name is only a placeholder. You can name the methods anything you like. In this method, I read up the ID from the repository, call the web service to fetch that book, and then I return a model and view object saying book JSP and passing along the book, so it will be rendered into the page. And the strong point that I want to make here is that you are able to dynamically build your dialogues as you like. You can call a web service, read the data source, basically anything that you would like. So I haven't talked much about view technology so far. Blossom tries to take a best of both worlds approach, where it wants to make available to you all the constructs that Magnolia provides and all the constructs that Spring provides to JSPs and free market templates. It has built-in support for free market and JSP, and everything that Spring supports, or that other frameworks that extend Spring Web MVC supports, work out of the box. For example, JSON, outputting PDF files, XML, RSS feeds, and so on. And Spring has some very nice things for views, both for JSP and FreeMarker. It has a tag lib which provides form validation and form binding to Java objects. So that really helps with parsing and dealing with the request parameters from forms. Now I'd like to talk about the project from which these ideas came. This is a site in Scandinavia. It's one of the largest online travel agencies. The address is www.ticket.se. It has, since it's a travel booking site, it has numerous integrations to airlines for booking tickets, to hotel chains for doing hotel reservations and rental cars. It even has integrations for fetching weather reports from around the world, showing current exchange rates and so on. And of course, online payment integrations. And naturally, connections back-end to mid-office sales applications. It uses Spring Remoting, which is a very lightweight RPC protocol, very easy to use, very fast. And it uses this to communicate with a few dedicated backends that perform search and book for this website. And the really cool thing here is the use of Spring Webflow. Like I said, Spring Webflow provides support for lengthy conversations with website visitors. It uses this for many things, but the point I want to make is that it uses this for the search and booking flows. So embedded in a page, there's a paragraph that uses Spring Webflow. This Webflow has many steps inside. You can go back and forth. You can step out of the flow to look at hotel details. So it's a very complicated type of navigation within this flow. And this is running on a single page in Magnolia inside a paragraph. And it's capable of doing redirects. So what Ticket wanted was to be able to add editorial content to parts of this flow. Like when you're looking at plane tickets, they want to provide information about tickets. When you're further in the flow looking at how to pay, they want information regarding how to perform your payment. So the flow might have 4 or 5 steps on one page, then it skips page to another where there's editorial content for this. So, in summary, Blossom takes a Spring-centric approach based on annotations. It gives you some novel features like pre-execution and dialog validation. It takes a code over configuration approach, which might be a personal preference, which one you prefer. I think the strong points for using code instead of configuration is the fact is versioning. You can write your code and check it into Subversion. So it's versioned with the rest of your application. I think it also helps with collaboration. If you're a team working together, just checking it into Subversion and that makes it available to your colleagues, I think is faster than exchanging XML files and reinstalling the module. You might notice that I haven't once talked about how to configure things in the repository because you barely do write Java code. And as I mentioned, it's really powerful to build your dialogs using code because you can do so many things. You can add conditions and you can populate them from external sources. And I also find, which might be counterintuitive, that it's faster to do it with code. If you run Magnolia in debug mode, in Eclipse, for instance, it's fast to write the code, compile it, and then just by a hot code replace, have it available in your running Magnolia. So my experience is that this makes it even actually faster than configuration. And also one of the strong points about Blossom is the fact that it has this support for pre-execution, that it can pre-execute the controller early in the filter chain. So the goal of Blossom was to make Magnolia the CMS of choice for Spring developers, which is sort of an ambitious goal. And also to make it easier to take advantage of everything the Spring has to offer when you're developing websites in Magnolia. Version 1.0 was released in May, and that implemented most of the vision I had when this project was started. Since then, we've released version 1.1, which was released after I joined Magnolia, so it's now under the Magnolia umbrella. And right now what's happening is that most of the new features come from suggestions from the community. So we're really interested, I'm really interested in hearing of your Spring integration needs, like what you've tried, what are the pain points, what are the things where Blossom could do better, or where Magnolia could do better in helping you use Spring. So your feedback really matters. There's actually a pretty good documentation, I would have to say. It goes into all the steps and all the things you need to know. It's available on the documentation site. There's also a sample that you can download. It's available in our Subversion. And since Blossom is now supported by Magnolia, you're able to file support requests in our Jira. And if you have any questions, I'm available on the mailing list. I try to answer everything that has to do with Blossom. And tomorrow at the unconference, you're welcome to join me in a session where we'll go through the sample, sort of a hands-on workshop, hopefully with a lot of discussions and ideas. Any questions?
Tab builder is usually a very important class when you want to create your dialog automatically. I for all the controls that are supported by Magnolia out of the box.
Yes.
But we also create our own controls, so is it possible to extend this class and have your own version injected there, which also have methods for creating your own custom controls?
Well,
can you please repeat the question for the recording?
Okay. So the question was, when you have your own custom controls, how can you use the tab builder class to add them to your tab? Is that right? Yeah. Of course, due to the tab builder class cannot touch classes outside of the Magnolia core. It has support for the built-in controls and the FCK editor. If you want to extend this, you can. I think this has been done by a few users. You can extend what's available as arguments. So you can create your own tab builder, or you can create your own class that extends tab builder and use that one instead. So you can customize what's available as arguments to your tab factory methods.
And then you can have your own class injected?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
As an argument to the method, yeah.
Another thing is I saw in your class that you did on the template class that you did request mapping in the annotation. And how does that relate to the normal Magnolia way of binding templates to pages, actually, where you create a page and then assign a template to it? Because that, if you do the request mapping like that, it implies that you do not have an actual page node anymore. Should I see that?
So, if I understood it correctly, the question is how does the URI mapping that you specify in the annotation relate to how the template is mapped to a specific page in the repository? Yeah. That was one of the hard points to get right. Spring Web MVC, since it's a web application framework, is based on request paths. It's based on request paths. It matches your URI to your controller. And when Blossom runs this inside of Magnolia, there is not really a use for a request path that way. Instead, templates are named. So what Blossom is, it looks at this annotation, and it takes the request path and it throws away all the slashes. So in the case of slash two columns, that will create a template by the name of two columns.
Yeah.
That's the name it uses. This can be customized on the top level annotation, so you would say add template and then name equals something else.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyone else?
Yeah, Blossom is not a normal module that needs configuration in the WebEx method, so you can't drop it in the Tomcat in the Magnolia installation. Do you have best practices, or do you plan to incorporate this application XML stuff in a bundled Magnolia, so you can rely on the basics so that it can drop in a Blossom module?
Yeah. So the question is, Blossom requires changes in WebXML, and is there any plans to improve this or do it any? To improve this. With the latest version, since Blossom added support for the module lifecycle, all you have to add to the WebXML is a listener, which is called servlet context exposing listener. And this is due to the fact that the servlet context from the servlet container is not available when modules start up in Magnolia. So since I joined Magnolia, I've tried to make this point heard. So with upcoming versions, this will go away. And that's the only thing. So after that, you will not need to change your WebXML at all. Anyone else?
It looks like all your configuration is now happening in Java code, which is nice, I guess, for certain use cases. And how about somebody who wants to add the behavior
Yes. The question is, when you use annotations, some of your some names, some of the things you specify on the annotations will be embedded into the code, so they're not easy to change runtime. Yeah, this is a fact that has to do simply by the fact that they are annotations. What you can do is use resource bundles. Instead of saying the label out plain, you use a key into the message bundle. When you're developing and running it in debugger mode, it's possible with some toolkits to change it live, but on a production environment, yeah, you will have to use resource bundles or something to change it live.
Or I would have to write filters and stuff, something in the configuration.
Yes. And else? Yeah.
I'm not quite sure this answer was part of my question. My question is, how do you configure, or how can you configure your controls? Like in Magnolia, you can add additional, for example, height or control or sizing or something like that. I didn't see this in your edit, for example. This one, first, the second is internationalization.
Yeah.
How do you support internationalization in your controls for Dialog search?
Do you mean configuration in the dialog or on the in the dialog? So the question is, how do you configure things like height on your dialog? Is that the question?
Right.
Yeah. If I go back to the.
If they have a lot more properties than.
Oh yeah. Okay. Now I can see the question.
In your factory then.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, how do you add additional configuration to your controls? The add edit, for instance, the add edit method returns the control object, which will be of type dialog edit, and on there's support for configuring it completely, like setting the height, whether it's the number of rows and so on, and also especially the FCK editor you want to configure, so you get the FCK editor control instance back, so you can configure it completely. Anyone else?
I have one more.
Okay.
Is it possible to use Groovy to create all that stuff?
I'm not a Groove expert, and I haven't tried to use it, but I assume that it would be possible. Sorry? Sorry. The question was whether it's possible to use Groovy with Blossom. And like I said, I'm not an expert on Groovy. I haven't tried using it with Blossom, but I assume that it would be possible. Okay. Yeah, it works. Okay, the question is, does it work with Spring 3? And yes, it works with Spring 2.5 or the 3.0 series. Am I out of time? Thank you.